The stone is still warm from the day before. You press your palm flat against it and feel the heat stored inside, not from the sun, but from the friction of 10,000 hands that moved it here. It weighs more than 8 tons. It was cut from a mountain 40 kilometers away, floated down a river on a raft of bamboo and lashed timber, dragged across dry ground on wooden sledges, and lifted to this exact position by a system of ropes and levers and human bodies. And tomorrow you will do it again. There is a man above you. You cannot see his face. You can only see the soles of his feet on the bamboo scaffolding, 60 feet overhead, and the dust falling from his chisel. The dust falls on you every morning. You have stopped noticing it. There are 30,000 workers on this site. Some of them will die here. Some of them already have. The stone does not remember their names. It does not remember yours. The tower above you is 65 meters tall. You will climb it. Not today, but soon. And when you do, you will feel the scaffold sway beneath you, and you will look down at the men below, and they will look the size of insects, and the city of Angkor will spread out across the plain in every direction as far as you can see. The reservoirs, the canals, the smaller temples, the fields of rice that feed 300,000 people. And you will understand in a way you cannot put into words what it means to build a god a house. The king does not sweat. You do. You sweat through your work cloth before the sun has cleared the tree line. You sweat through the morning ration of rice and fish. You sweat through the measuring and the marking and the cutting. You sweat through the hours when the heat makes the stone shimmer and the men around you move slower and slower. The king is a god. You are the man who cuts the stone that the god stands on. A priest will bless the block before it is placed. No one will bless you. There is a wall in the western gallery that stretches for 760 meters without interruption. It is covered in carvings. You will spend months preparing the surface of one section of that wall, grinding it flat, smoothing it to the exact depth the sculptors require, pulling the tool across the stone until your shoulders stop hurting and your arms simply go numb. The sculptors will come after you. They will not thank you. This is not their fault. This is simply the order of things. There are those who carve the gods, and there are those who make the surface ready for the gods to be carved upon. You are the surface. One morning, before the rains come, a man will fall from the scaffolding. You will hear it before you see it. The sound is not what you expect. You expected something sudden, a crack, a shout. Instead, there is a brief silence, a pause in the ordinary noise of the sight, and then a sound like wet cloth dropped from a great height, and then the ordinary noise resumes, and the men around you keep working, because there is nothing else to do. The stone does not wait. You are 28 years old. You have been doing this for 11 years. You know this site better than you know your own village. You know the way the morning mist sits in the moat. You know which sections of scaffolding creak in the wind and which are steady. You know the sound a good stone makes when the chisel finds it correctly, a solid, dense knock, the sound of material that has no fault. versus the dull, yielding response of stone with a fracture running through it. You know this, and the king does not know your name. This is quiet history at bedtime. If this is your kind of story, a subscribe means everything right now. Every detail in this story comes from the historical record. Just relax and feel free to let this play as you drift off to sleep. Now, let us begin. Your name is Dara. You are 28 years old. You were born in a small village 3 days' walk to the east of Angkor, in the lowlands near the Tonle Sap Lake. Your father was a stonemason. His father was a stonemason before him. You have been holding a chisel since you were old enough to hold anything. You are not a slave. This is important to understand. You are not a slave, and you are not a prisoner. You are here because this is what your family does. In the Khmer Empire, under the reign of Suryavarman II, there is a system of labor obligation called Rajakarya, royal service. Every free man owes the king a portion of his labor. For some men, this means working the rice fields on royal land. For some men, it means carrying messages or maintaining roads. For you, it has always meant stone. Your obligation is 8 months of every year on the building site. The other 4 months you return to your village, tend your small plot of land, and see your wife, Srey, and your daughter, who is 5 years old and does not fully understand yet why her father disappears for most of the year. You have tried to explain it to her. You told her you are building a house for the gods. She asked which gods. You told her Vishnu, the great preserver, the one who keeps the world from flying apart. She thought about this for a while, and then asked if Vishnu would visit your house too, once his was finished. You did not have a good answer. The year is 1150 AD by a calendar you do not use or know. In your understanding of time, it is the 32nd year of the reign of Suryavarman II, the king who commissioned this temple. The temple is called Angkor Wat, the city temple, and it is the largest religious structure ever built anywhere on earth. You do not know this for certain. You have never left Cambodia. You have no way of comparing. But the men on this site, the engineers, the senior priests, the master builders who have traveled, they say this in low voices, with a tone that carries more weight than ordinary speech. The largest, ever, anywhere. You believe them. Suryavarman II has been king since 1113 AD, since you were 9 years old. He came to power by defeating 2 rival claimants to the throne in battle, a struggle that was less a war than a series of violent negotiations conducted with elephants and spears. He is not simply a king in the way that a village headman is a chief, elevated in rank but still recognizably human. Suryavarman II is a Devaraja, a god king. He is understood to be an earthly manifestation of Vishnu himself, the god made flesh, walking among his people in the form of a man. This is not metaphor. This is theology. It means the temple you are building is not merely a monument to a powerful ruler. It is a cosmological statement. It is the Khmer Empire's claim, made in stone and stretching across 200 hectares of land, that the center of the universe is here in Angkor. and that the man who sits on the throne of this empire is its divine axis. You carry this knowledge with you into work every morning, not consciously, the way you carry your father's technique in the way you hold a chisel. It is simply part of the structure of reality. The sight around you this morning is already in full motion when you arrive. You wake before the sun. This is not a choice. The work bell, a single large bronze instrument hung at the eastern gate of the site, is struck at the first suggestion of dawn light, and the sound carries for half a kilometer in every direction. The workers' camp where you sleep is close enough that the sound arrives before you are fully conscious. You roll off your sleeping mat. The mat is woven reed, slightly damp from the night air, and it leaves faint marks on your forearm where you have been pressing against it. The air at this hour is cool. This is the only hour of the day when it is cool. By mid-morning, the heat will settle over the site like a second ceiling, trapping the warmth rising from thousands of bodies and the stone that has been absorbing sun since the previous day. But now, in the gray light before sunrise, you can breathe without effort. You have a cloth you wear wrapped around your waist and a second cloth you keep over one shoulder. Both are rough cotton, dyed a dull reddish brown with natural pigment. The color was practical once. It hides the stone dust. Now it is simply what your clothes look like. You cannot remember them being any other color. You take your tools from the wooden rack beside your sleeping space. Your tools are the most valuable things you own. This is not sentiment. This is the actual economic reality of your life. A skilled stonemason's iron chisels represent months of work and significant material cost. You have 7 chisels of varying widths, a stone hammer, 2 wooden mallets of different weights, a measuring cord knotted at precise intervals, a straight edge of hardwood, and a small iron pick for rough work. You keep them in a cloth roll secured with a strip of leather. You check them every morning, not because you are anxious, because a chisel with a hairline crack in the head can shatter under a hammer blow and send metal fragments into your eye, and you have seen this happen, and you would prefer it did not happen to you. The tools are sound. You secure the roll over your shoulder and join the stream of workers moving toward the eastern gate. The scale of this site is not something that diminishes with familiarity. Every morning, approaching the complex from the workers' camp, you round a curve in the access road, and the western entrance comes into view across the main causeway, a stone bridge 3 meters wide and 250 meters long, flanked by nagas, the great serpent figures whose stone hoods rear up at regular intervals along the balustrade. The causeway crosses the outer moat, which is 190 meters wide, and forms a rectangle around the entire complex. 5 kilometers of moat in total, dug by hand, fed by a system of canals connected to the Siem Reap River. The water in the moat this morning is still and dark, reflecting the pale sky above it. You have crossed this causeway thousands of times. You still look at the water when you cross it. At the eastern gatehouse, a site overseer marks your attendance with a notch on a bamboo tally stick. 1 notch per worker per day, 1 stick per work crew of 50 men. Your crew is designated by a symbol carved into a wooden badge you wear on a cord around your wrist, a simplified rendering of a chisel which marks you as a precision cutter rather than a laborer or a transport worker. The distinction matters. There are three broad categories of workers on this site. The lowest category is raw labor, men whose obligation is physical mass, who move stone and timber and earth, who dig and carry and haul. Above them are the specialist tradespeople, carpenters, rope makers, plasterers, water carriers who maintain the site's supply chain. Above them are the craftsmen, the masons who shape stone, the sculptors who carve it, the master builders who design and oversee. You are at the upper edge of this middle tier, skilled enough that the overseers know your name and what you can do, but not yet a master in your own right. Above all of them, visible only occasionally at a distance, are the Brahmin priests and the royal engineers, men of a different order entirely, who carry rolled palm leaf manuscripts and speak in Sanskrit, and whose instructions filter down through layers of supervisors before reaching you. Your crew chief this morning is a man named Van. He is 43 years old, heavily built, with a long scar running from his left ear to his jawline from an accident years ago that you did not witness. He has been on this site since the earliest days of construction, since the land clearing, since the moat digging, since the laying of the first foundation stones. He knows this building in his body. He can tell by the sound of a chisel strike whether the angle is correct without looking up from his own work. He hands you your assignment for the day without ceremony. Third gallery, north face, column section 7, he says. Surface prep. The sculptors come in 4 days. You nod. 4 days is not much time. Column section 7 is approximately 12 meters of sandstone surface, and the sculptors require a flatness within tolerances that take time to achieve. Not just roughly flat, but measurably, verifiably flat, to within the width of a finger across any 2-meter span. You will spend most of today pulling a long, straight edge across the stone and finding the high points that need to come down. And tomorrow you will begin the process of bringing them down, millimeter by careful millimeter. You move toward the third gallery. The morning light is strengthening now, and the sandstone of the inner galleries is beginning to take on its characteristic golden-orange color, a color that shifts through the day from gold in the morning to pale cream at noon to deep amber in the late afternoon. The stone comes from Phnom Kulen, the sacred mountain 40 kilometers to the northeast, quarried in blocks and transported across the Siem Reap River and through a network of canals that the royal engineers designed specifically for this purpose. The logistics of moving this stone are, in their own way, as remarkable as the building itself. Phnom Kulen is not simply a quarry. It is a sacred site, the mountain from which Suryavarman II declared the independence and divine authority of the Khmer Empire in 1113 AD, early in his reign. The stone that comes from this mountain carries with it the authority of that declaration. Every block of sandstone in this structure passed through the hands of workers at the quarry face, was loaded onto rafts of lashed timber, floated downriver to a landing point near the building site, and then dragged overland the remaining distance on wooden sledges greased with animal fat. A single large block weighs between 1 and 8 tons, depending on its dimensions. The system requires hundreds of workers per block, organized into precise relay teams, rollers placed under the sledge at the front, picked up from behind, carried forward, and replaced at the front again, in a continuous chain of human effort. You were part of these transport crews in your first 2 years on the site. You do not miss it. You reach column section 7 and set down your tool roll. The stone here is rough from the initial dressing, the first pass cutting that squared the blocks before they were placed. Your job now is secondary finishing, pulling the surface flat, removing tool marks, preparing it for the sculptors who will cut into it with far finer instruments than yours, and create the images that will still be here in this stone for longer than you have any framework to understand. You unroll your tools. You pick up the straight edge and hold it against the stone face, sighting down its length with one eye closed. The gap between the wood and the stone is uneven. It is always uneven at the start. You reach for the wide blade chisel and the mallet, and the morning's work begins. The first strike echoes briefly off the stone corridor walls and is then absorbed by the general noise of the site, the knocking and scraping of 100 other tools, the low murmur of men talking, the occasional shout of an overseer, the distant creak of rope and timber where the lifting rigs are in operation on the upper levels of the central sanctuary. You work in a rhythm you have developed over 11 years. Strike, assess, reposition. Strike again. The stone comes down in thin layers. The dust rises and settles on your forearms and on your cloth and in your hair and at the corners of your eyes. You blink it away. After a while, you stop blinking it away. It is simply part of the texture of the morning. The sandstone from Phnom Kulen is relatively soft as stone goes, somewhere between limestone and granite on a scale of resistance, which makes it workable with iron tools, but also means it responds immediately to a misstruck blow. Too much force, and you take off more than you intended. You cannot put stone back. This is the central discipline of the work. You can always take more off. You cannot put any back. You work this section the way your father taught you, not in lines but in broad passes, reducing the entire surface evenly rather than working one area to completion and then moving to the next. The straight edge goes across the stone every 20 minutes. You watch where it rocks. You mark the high points with a smear of charcoal. You take them down. By mid-morning, the surface is beginning to come true. You step back and check it with your fingertips, drawing them slowly across the face in a diagonal pass, the skin reading what the eye misses. A slight roughness here, a barely perceptible ridge there. Not visible, but present. You go back in with a finer chisel. Around you, the third gallery hums with work. This gallery, the third enclosure, forms the outermost of the 3 nested rectangular galleries that make up the main temple structure. It measures 870 meters from east to west and more than a kilometer in perimeter. Its walls carry the longest continuous bas-relief narrative sequence anywhere on Earth. 8 separate panels stretching across the southern and western faces, depicting scenes from Hindu scripture and from the reign of Suryavarman II himself. You know some of what the carvings show. The priests explain the imagery to the workers in periodic assemblies, not because they believe the workers need to understand, but because a workforce that knows the religious significance of what it is building works differently than one that does not. The knowledge changes the body. You have seen it. A man who understands that he is shaping the body of a god moves his chisel with a different weight than a man who thinks he is simply dressing stone for pay. One panel shows the churning of the ocean of milk. You know this story. In the beginning, the great ocean contained within it the nectar of immortality, Amrita, hidden beneath its surface. The gods and the demons agreed to churn the ocean together to bring the nectar to the surface. They used the sacred mountain Mandara as a churning rod, and the great serpent Vasuki as the rope. Vishnu held the mountain steady from below, in his form as the cosmic tortoise, and they churned. Gods on one side, demons on the other, pulling back and forth across the length of the serpent. And the ocean gave up its contents one by one. The divine physician, the goddess of fortune, the moon, the sun, the white elephant, the divine horse, and at last the nectar itself, held in a pot by the physician Dhanvantari. The carving that will represent this story will stretch for 49 meters. You will have prepared some of that surface. Your chisel against the stone, your hands making the surface ready for Vishnu to emerge from it. You stop thinking about this and go back to work. The sun has moved, the shadows in the gallery have shortened, and the direct light is beginning to come in at an angle that makes it harder to read the stone surface clearly. You shift your position, angling your body so the light falls across rather than along the face you are working. This is a technique your father showed you when you were 12 years old. Crosslight, he said. Always work in crosslight when you can. It shows you everything. He was right. The shallow ridges that were invisible in flat light become clearly legible when the light is raking across them at an angle. Every remaining imperfection in the surface stands out in sharp relief. You can see exactly what remains to be done. You reach for the fine chisel and keep working. The morning ration comes at midday. A pair of young men from the supply crew move through the gallery carrying wooden trays. One tray with portions of cooked rice pressed into rough balls. One tray with small clay cups of fish sauce and a piece of dried fish per worker. You take your portion and eat standing near your work section, looking at the surface you have been preparing. The rice is plain. The fish is strongly salted, the way preserved food always is. You eat without much attention to it. After 11 years, the food on this site is simply the taste of this life, neither good nor bad. Around you, the gallery is full of other men eating, talking in low voices, resting their arms. A group of transport workers sits against the far wall, their shoulders visibly exhausted from the morning's hauling. One of them has taken off his sandal and is inspecting his foot, a blister or a cut, or the beginning of one of the foot infections that spread through the workers' camp during the wet season. You finish eating and go back to work. The afternoon is harder. The heat is at its peak, and the stone, which absorbed the morning sun, now radiates it back at you from the face you are working. The air in the gallery is close. The sweat comes freely, and the dust from the stone surface sticks to your wet skin, and you drink from your water skin more often than usual. But the surface is coming flat. By the time the work bell sounds the end of the afternoon session, you have brought 3 meters of column section 7 to within tolerance. 9 meters remain. You have 4 days. The arithmetic is tight but achievable if the next 3 days hold. You roll your tools back into their cloth and secure them. You make one final check, pressing the straight edge across the finished section and sighting down it with one eye closed. No gap. The stone is flat and true and ready. Somewhere in the next 4 days, a sculptor will come to this gallery with finer tools than yours and begin to find inside this surface you have prepared the figures that are already there, Vishnu and the demons and the great churning ocean waiting to be found. You take your tools and walk toward the gate. The evening light is falling across the moat now in a long orange sheet, and the approach balustrade throws shadows across the water that stretch and thin as you walk past them. You cross the causeway without looking down. You have learned, over 11 years, not to look at beautiful things too long when there is still work to do tomorrow. The second day begins the same way every day begins. The bronze bell at the eastern gate. The damp mat, the cool air, the tools you check before you are fully awake. But this morning there is something else. When you step out of the sleeping area and join the stream of workers moving toward the gate, Van is already standing at the entrance to your row of sleeping quarters, waiting for you. He does not wait for workers at the sleeping quarters. He waits at the site. This means something has changed. They're moving the assignment, he says, without preamble. You look at him. Column section 7 is being redirected. The sculptors pushed back their schedule by 3 days. You're on block transport today. You absorb this. Transport work is not what you are for. Your value to this site is in precision cutting, the kind of work that requires skill and experience, that takes years to develop. Moving a stone block from one place to another requires strength and coordination, but not the knowledge you carry in your hands. Sending you to transport work is, from a purely practical standpoint, a waste of your specific skills. You do not say this. Which section, you ask? Western approach, upper gallery stones. They're bringing up the coping blocks for the northern tower face. You nod and secure your tool roll over your shoulder. You will not need your chisels today, but you have carried them every day for 11 years, and you do not know how to leave them behind. The western approach to the upper galleries of the central sanctuary is a different world from the third gallery surface work you were doing yesterday. To reach the upper levels of the central tower complex, you must climb. The Khmer engineers designed the temple as a representation of Mount Meru, the cosmic mountain at the center of the Hindu universe, and they were literal about this. The structure rises in 3-tiered galleries, each one set higher than the last, with steep stairways connecting them. The angle of the central stairways is approximately 70 degrees from horizontal. This is not a stairway designed for comfort. It is designed to force the body into a posture of supplication. You must ascend on all fours, or very nearly, and the effect on any body climbing it for the first time is a combination of physical effort and something close to awe. You have climbed these stairs more times than you can count. You still feel it in your legs at the top. The upper gallery sits at roughly 13 meters above the ground level of the second enclosure, and the base of the central sanctuary tower rises from there. The scaffolding around the northern tower face begins at the upper gallery level and extends upward to approximately 45 meters, close to the height at which the stone construction transitions to the corbelled vaultwork of the tower's upper section. The scaffold is bamboo, lashed with rattan cord, and it covers the tower face in a dense grid of horizontal and vertical poles with working platforms at regular intervals. From below, it looks like the building has grown a second skin, an organic, temporary layer that will eventually come away to reveal the finished stone beneath. You reach the bottom of the main stairway and look up. The blocks you will be moving today are coping stones, the flat capstone pieces that sit at the top edges of the lower tower face, covering the joint between the vertical wall surface and the beginning of the corbelled roof structure. They are cut in irregular shapes, each one unique to its specific position, fitted without mortar to the stones beside and beneath them in the dry masonry technique that holds this entire structure together. Each coping block weighs between 300 and 600 kilograms. They must go up the scaffolding by rope. This is of the many categories of work on this site, the one that claims lives most reliably. Not from carelessness. Most of the men who die on this site are not careless. They die because rope fails. Because a lashing comes undone under a load it has held successfully 50 times before. Because a bamboo pole splits in a way the inspection before the day's work did not reveal. Because two things go wrong at slightly different moments, and there is no margin for two things going wrong. You know the protocols. All of the long-term workers know the protocols, because the protocols exist because people died before them. You join the transport crew at the base of the northern tower face. There are 22 men in this crew today, organized into specific roles. 6 on the ground to secure the rope harness around each block. 4 on the hoist, a pulley system of carved wooden wheels mounted on a bamboo A-frame structure. 8 on the scaffold above to receive and position each block, and 4 spotters positioned at intervals along the height of the scaffold whose only job is to watch the rope, the harness, and the block at all times and call out if anything changes. You are assigned to the ground level securing crew. This is the right assignment for you. Van knows what he is doing. He put a man with good hand judgment in the position where the rope harness must be tied correctly, because a badly tied harness is where failures begin. The first block of the morning is already waiting. It has been cut, final dressed, and marked on 2 faces with a chisel symbol indicating its position in the wall, a reference system developed by the master builders that allows every block on this site to be identified by its designated location without any written notation, since most of the workers cannot read and the site cannot depend on literacy. You crouch beside the block and examine it. The stone is Phnom Kulen sandstone, the same material as everything else on this level. At this height in the structure, some sections use laterite, a red, iron-rich stone quarried locally that is harder than sandstone and used for structural elements that will bear significant weight. But these coping stones are sandstone, both for consistency of appearance and because laterite, for all its strength, does not take fine finishing work as cleanly. You pass your hands around the block, finding the center of mass. This is not a calculation you do consciously. You have handled enough stone that your hands and your body make the assessment before your mind articulates it. The block's mass is distributed slightly toward one end. It narrows at the other end by about 4 finger widths, giving it a slight taper. You call the center point to your crew and 2 men come in with rope. The harness is a specific pattern, Not a simple cradle, but a configuration that distributes the load through 3 separate contact points on the block and terminates in a single lifting point above the center of mass. If the lifting point is off-center and the block rotates during ascent, it puts uneven load on the rope and increases the risk of the harness slipping. You tie your section of the harness. You tie it the way your father taught you, and then you tie it again in a redundant pass over the primary knot. When the harness is complete across all 3 contact points, you call the lead spotter to inspect. He walks around the block, tugging each line, checking each knot, and then nods. "Ready to load," you say. The hoist crew takes up the slack in the rope. The rope is heavy, woven from plant fiber, thick as your thumb, and several meters longer than the height of the scaffold. It runs up through the pulley system at the top of the A-frame and back down the other side to a team of 4 men who will walk backward to generate the lifting force while the pulley multiplies their effort. A pulley of this configuration, a fixed upper wheel and a moving lower wheel through which the rope passes, roughly halves the force required to lift the load, though it doubles the length of rope that must be pulled. The mathematics of this were worked out by the Royal Engineers and communicated to the site in practical terms. 4 men of normal strength can lift a stone of this weight at a rate of approximately 1 meter per minute. "Haul," the lead spotter calls. The rope comes tight. The block does not move immediately. There is a moment, always this same moment, where the ground is still holding the stone and the rope is holding the stone, and neither has fully won, and the rope vibrates slightly under the tension, and the bamboo A-frame creaks, and the sound of the hoist crew's feet on the packed earth is the only motion in the world. Then the block lifts. 1 centimeter of air appears between the stone and the ground. The block rises slowly, with the rope at a slightly higher pitch as the load transfers fully to the pulley system. You stand back and watch. This is the moment when your job is to watch the harness across all 3 contact points. Watch the way the block hangs. Watch for any sign of rotation or tipping that would indicate the center of mass is not where you calculated it. The block hangs true. It rises along the face of the scaffold, slowly, at the pace of the hoist crew's walking. The spotters on the scaffold call the height, 5 meters, 10 meters, 15. At each interval, a man on the scaffold above leans out and checks the clearance between the block and the scaffold poles. At 20 meters, one of the scaffold spotters shouts, "Hold." The hoist crew stops. You cannot see from the ground what has caused the hold. You wait. 30 seconds pass. "Continue," the spotter calls. The block begins rising again. You will find out later that a lashing on one of the horizontal scaffold poles had loosened during the previous day's work, and the block was within a hand's width of striking it during the ascent. The scaffold crew retied the lashing in those 30 seconds. The block reaches the upper platform, and the scaffold crew takes it, guiding it into position with wooden guide poles while the hoist crew holds the tension steady. Then, down. The rope slackens. The block is on the platform. You hear, from 20 meters above you, the sound of wooden mallets tapping the block into its final position. The careful, measured sound of the last adjustment, the stone being married to the stones beside it without mortar, relying on precise fit and the weight of what will come above it to hold it in place for as long as the building stands. You go back to the next block. There are 11 more to move today. The morning passes in this rhythm. Harness, inspect, lift, watch, lower rope, move to the next stone. The work is physically easier for you than precision cutting, but harder in a different way. Precision cutting asks everything of your hands and your attention. Transport work asks everything of your body, the crouching and straightening, the carrying of rope and guide poles, the constant tension of watching a heavy object in motion above you. By mid-morning, your shoulders are tight and the base of your neck aches from looking upward. You drink from your water skin and stretch your arms above your head, feeling the pull in your back. The sight around you is, as always, immense. From the base of the northern tower face, looking across the second enclosure, you can see the entire sweep of the inner gallery complex, the stone corridors connecting the towers, the decorative pediments above the doorways, the lesser towers at each corner of the second enclosure, each one echoing the form of the central tower at reduced scale. The 5 towers of the central sanctuary represent the 5 peaks of Mount Meru. The moat that surrounds the outer enclosure represents the cosmic ocean. The causeways crossing the moat represent the bridges between the human world and the divine. You know all of this. The priests told you. Van told you. You have been told, over 11 years, enough of the symbolic architecture of this building that you carry it alongside the technical knowledge, the 2 kinds of understanding layered over each other like the 2 faces of a chisel blade, one side the meaning, one side the method. A man comes to find you at the 3rd block of the morning. He is one of the junior overseers, a young man, perhaps 20 years old, who carries a palm leaf notebook and a reed stylus, and whose job involves recording the movement of stone through the site. He wears a cotton dhoti of slightly better quality than yours, and he has the look of someone who works mostly in shade. Dara, he says, reading your name from his notebook. Precision cutting crew. Chisel mark? Yes, you say. Master Che wants to see you after the midday rest. You look at him. Today? This afternoon. Master Che is the senior master builder responsible for the northern face of the central sanctuary. He is a man in his late 50s, thin, with hands that look almost too delicate for the work he oversees. Long-fingered, precise, the hands of a man who has spent decades making measurements. He does not summon individual workers without reason. Tell him I'll come, you say. The junior overseer makes a note and moves on. You go back to the block harness. But the thought sits with you through the rest of the morning. Master Che does not summon workers to complain. He summons them to assign them something specific that requires specific ability. In 11 years on this site, you have been summoned by a master builder twice before today. Both times the summons changed your work for several months. You tie the harness on the 4th block of the morning with particular care. The midday rest comes. You eat your rice and fish in the shade of the second enclosure wall, sitting with 2 men from your regular cutting crew who have also been pulled to transport work today. A man named Wrath, who is 35 and has been on the site almost as long as you, and a younger man called Sokka, 22, who grew up in Angkor itself. "Did they tell you what Shay wants?" Wrath asks. "No," you say. "I heard he's looking for someone for upper sanctuary stonework," Soka says. "Someone who can work in restricted space, the inner shrine." You say nothing, but you think about this. The inner shrine of the central sanctuary, the small chamber at the heart of the central tower that contains the primary image of Vishnu, is not a place ordinary workers go. The ordinary worker sees the corridors, the galleries, the exterior faces. The inner shrine is for priests, for the king, and for the very small number of craftsmen whose work requires them to be there. If the summons from Master Che is what Soka suggests, it means a change in your status on this site. You finish eating and sit for a while with the weight of that thought. Then the rest period ends and you go back to the blocks. There are 7 more stones before the afternoon session finishes. You move through them with the same methodical care as the morning. Harness, inspect, haul, watch. But the physical labor, which was tiring in the morning, is now genuinely hard. The afternoon heat is at full strength, and the stone and the bamboo scaffolding and the packed earth of the working area are all radiating stored warmth back at the people moving through them. The sweat on your skin dries almost as fast as it forms, leaving a residue of salt that tightens the skin at your wrists and at the corners of your mouth. On the 10th block of the day, there is a moment. The block is mid-ascent, at approximately 12 meters, when you hear a sound from the scaffold that is not right. It is not a dramatic sound. It is a small sound, a brief percussive crack, the sound of something under stress that just exceeded its tolerance. A bamboo pole. A lashing under load. You shout before you have time to think. "Hold, everyone clear." The hoist crew stops. The spotters on the scaffold react to the shouting before they have identified what you heard, which is the correct response. Shout first, understand later. The block hangs in the air at 12 meters. For 4 or 5 seconds, nothing happens. Then you see it, a section of the scaffold about 8 meters up and 3 meters to the right of the block has developed a visible sag. One of the horizontal bracing poles has slipped its lashing at one end and is no longer providing lateral support to the section above it. The block is not in danger. It is clear of that section. But if the scaffold fails in that location while men are working above it, the chain reaction through the upper structure could affect the platform where the receiving crew is standing. You call the evacuation. The scaffold crew comes down, the receiving team, the spotters on the damaged section, the men working adjacent sections, in a controlled descent that takes about 3 minutes. No one is hurt. The block is lowered back to the ground. The hoist crew walks forward and the tension comes off the rope. A scaffold repair crew is called. The repair takes 40 minutes. You sit on a stone block 20 meters from the tower and watch the repair crew work. 2 experienced men whose entire job on this site is the maintenance and repair of the bamboo scaffolding. They retie the failed lashing with a different knot configuration and add a secondary lashing parallel to it. Then they test the repaired section by hanging their full body weight from it, both of them, together. The scaffold holds. The transport crew resumes. The last block of the day goes up cleanly at an hour before the work bell sounds. And when it lands on the upper platform and you hear the mallets tapping it into place, you feel the small satisfaction of a thing completed that could have gone wrong and did not. You coil the harness rope and carry it back to the equipment store. Then you go to find Master Shea. He is in a covered work area on the east side of the inner gallery complex, a partially roofed space where the master builders keep their plans, their measuring instruments, and the scale models of sections of the building that they use to communicate construction sequences to the overseers. Master Che is sitting on a low wooden stool, studying a carved stone block that has been placed on a work table in front of him. He is alone. He does not look up when you arrive. You stand and wait. After perhaps 30 seconds, he looks up at you. "Dara," he says, "sit." There is no other stool. You sit on the stone floor. Master Che sets down the block and looks at you directly. His eyes are deeply set, and in the late afternoon light filtering through the roof structure, he has the look of a man who is making a calculation about you. "You've been on this site 11 years, he says. "Yes." "Your father was a mason." "Yes." "Where did he work?" "Khmer, mostly. Some work at Bangmalia in his later years." Master Che nods. Khmer is a major Khmer temple complex in the northeastern territories. Significant work, serious stone. Bangmalia is closer to Angkor, a site that predates this one and shares some of its builders. "The inner sanctuary needs finishing work," Master Che says. "The threshold stones at the eastern doorway. 2 of the threshold stones are out of level. They were set last season and the settling has moved them. The deviation is small, but it will not do." You understand. The threshold stones at the entrance to the inner shrine are the surfaces the king walks on during the festival rituals. They are seen by the Brahmin priests at every ceremony. A deviation of even a few millimeters, visible in the way lamplight catches an uneven surface, would be noticed. You want them re-leveled without removing them, you say. It is not quite a question. Can you do it? You think about it carefully. To re-level a set threshold stone without removing it, without disturbing the blocks around it that have already fully settled, means working the upper surface alone, bringing down the high side by a fraction of a millimeter at a time, using the finest finishing tools in a space where you cannot swing a mallet freely, and where the priest overseers will be watching, and where there is absolutely no margin for error. I can do it, you say. Master Che studies you for another moment. The work begins the day after tomorrow, he says. You will go in with one of the senior priests in the morning. You will be shown the image. You will not speak in the inner chamber unless spoken to. You will not touch anything except the stones you are assigned to correct. I understand. You will leave your work mark on the underside of the threshold capstone, not the upper surface. The upper surface will show nothing. No mark visible to anyone who walks over it. This is the nature of the work. The most important stone you will ever touch will bear no sign that you touched it. It will be smooth and level and correct, and no one will know it was otherwise, or know that you were the one who made it right. You nod. Master Che waves you out. You walk back through the inner gallery toward the main causeway, and the evening light is laying long shadows through the corridor openings. and the stone around you is cool now that the sun has moved off it, and somewhere in the corridors near you a group of workers is singing, low, rhythmic, one of the work songs from the eastern provinces that gets passed around the site, and half the time you don't know the words but you know the shape of the melody. You cross the causeway. The water in the moat catches the orange sky and holds it. You walk toward camp. Tomorrow will be the same as today and different in every way that matters. The morning of the third day begins differently. Van finds you before the bell has fully stopped ringing. You're off transport, he says. Master Shay's orders. You're on gallery prep today, southern face, panel 3. The sculptors start on panel 2 this morning, and panel 3 follows in sequence. You nod. This is the work you were supposed to be doing 2 days ago, before the transport reassignment. The surface preparation of the bas-relief panels, the long, continuous wall of carved narrative that runs the length of the southern and western galleries of the third enclosure. You collect your tools and move toward the southern gallery. The morning light is coming in at a low angle from the east, and the long corridor of the southern face is lit from one end, the light traveling the length of the wall and picking up every texture in the rough-dressed sandstone, every chisel mark from the initial cutting, every slight unevenness in the surface that your work today will be required to eliminate. You stop in front of panel 3 and stand for a moment, reading the stone. This is something your father taught you that has no practical name, but that every experienced mason does, standing before a section of stone and simply looking at it before touching it. Not measuring, not planning in any precise way. Just letting your eyes move across the surface and your body absorb the information. The panel is approximately 18 meters wide and 4 meters tall. It is rough. Not rough in the way of unworked stone. The initial dressing has already brought it to a roughly flat plane, but rough in the way of a face that has been cut quickly for geometry and not yet cut slowly for quality. There are ridges where the preliminary chisel work changed angle. There are zones where the stone's natural grain runs at a diagonal to the cut surface, leaving a slightly different texture than the surrounding areas. There are 2 places, one near the top left corner, one about a third of the way along near the base, where the initial dressing went slightly too deep and created shallow depressions that will need to be managed rather than corrected. You cannot bring a depression up. You can only bring everything else down to meet it. This is one of the fundamental problems of surface preparation. The constraint imposed by those 2 shallow zones will determine the final target depth of the entire panel. You cannot bring the panel to the depth the sculptors ideally want, because the depressions set a floor you cannot go below without creating visible anomalies in the carved figures above them. You will need to tell the sculptor. His name is Nak. You have worked adjacent to him twice before on this site, not directly with him, but in the same gallery sections, close enough to watch him work. He is perhaps 45 years old, originally from a family of specialist craftsmen attached to the royal court, and he carries himself with the slightly different posture of a man who knows that his skill cannot be easily replaced. He is not unkind. He is simply accustomed to the work moving around him, rather than the reverse. He will not be pleased about the depressions. You make a note of their locations, pressing a charcoal mark at each one, and then begin the measuring pass. You take your knotted cord and your straight edge, and you walk the length of the panel, holding the straight edge against the surface at regular intervals, recording in your memory the pattern of high and low points across the full 18 meters. The high points are manageable. There are more of them than you would like, but they are not severe. The initial dressing crew did competent work, and the deviations are within the range of what a methodical surface preparation can resolve in the time available. The two depressions are the problem. You stand in front of the larger one, near the base, about a handspan in diameter, roughly 4 millimeters below the surrounding surface, and you think about the carving that will eventually overlay this area. Panel 3 depicts a scene from the Mahabharata, the Battle of Kurukshetra, the great war between the Pandava and Kaurava armies that forms the centerpiece of the epic. This section of the panel will show massed infantry, rows of foot soldiers moving in formation, their spear points rising above them in a rhythmic line. A 4 millimeter depression under infantry figures is workable. The sculptors cut the figures to a depth of roughly 15 to 20 millimeters into the surface. The base of the carved relief, the background plane of the image, is the surface you are preparing. The figures stand out from that background. If the background is not perfectly flat, but has a shallow depression, the figures carved above it will simply have slightly less material beneath the deepest cut, but the surface of the figures themselves, the faces, the spears, the feet, will still be level with each other because the sculptor works downward from the face of the stone, not upward from the background. This is manageable. You revise your initial concern slightly. The depression near the top left corner is more problematic. That area, according to the reference drawing, will show a war elephant and its rider, a figure requiring deeper carving, more material removed, more dependence on a consistent background depth. You will still need to tell knack. You pick up your wide blade chisel and begin. The first pass across a panel like this is always the roughest. You are taking down the most prominent high points, the places where the initial dressing left clear ridges. The work here is not delicate. You use a heavier mallet and a wider blade, and you move relatively quickly, not trying to achieve final tolerance, but simply to reduce the gross variation before the fine work begins. The stone responds solidly under the chisel, a dense, even knock with each strike, the sound of material that has no fault running through it. This is good sandstone. The Phnom Kulen quarry produces stone of variable quality. Some sections have fracture planes running through them that only become apparent when you begin cutting, and the stone will split unpredictably along those planes. But this stone has the density and consistency of the best quality cuts from the upper quarry face, and the chips come away in controlled flakes rather than irregular fragments. You settle into the rhythm of the work. The morning passes around you. In the next section of the gallery, panel 2, you can hear the sculptors beginning their work. The sound of a sculptor's chisel is different from a mason's, lighter, more frequent, the pace of a different kind of attention. Where a mason's strike is deliberate and spaced, the sculptor's hand moves in something closer to continuous contact with the stone, reading it through the tool, adjusting pressure and angle moment to moment, in a way that looks, from the outside, almost effortless. It is not effortless. You know this because you have watched knock work, and you have seen the concentration required, and you have seen the moments when the stone does something unexpected and he has to stop and stand back and recalculate. The ease is performed. Underneath it is years of accumulated judgment about how this stone in this position responds to this angle of approach. The same is true of your own work. You just do not perform the ease in the same way. At mid-morning, Nak himself comes around the corner of the gallery to inspect the progress on panel 3. He stands beside you without speaking and looks at the surface you have been working. After perhaps a minute, he says, "The left corner." "I know," you say. "There's a depression in the initial dressing, about 4 millimeters. It runs approximately here." You indicate the area with your hand to here. Nak steps closer and crouches, sighting across the surface from a low angle. In crosslight, the depression is clearly visible, a subtle shadow across the zone where the stone dips below the surrounding plane. "How far down can you bring the surrounding surface?" he asks. "To the floor of the depression, yes, but it changes your working depth in that corner by 4 millimeters across about this area." You indicate a zone roughly 2 arm spans wide. Nak is silent for a moment. "The elephant and rider," he says, thinking aloud. "The rider is mounted high. The elephant's feet are at the lower register." He pauses. "I can work around it. I'll take the elephant's feet slightly shallower. The eye reads the figure, not the depth." You nod. This is the kind of judgment that comes from experience, the ability to see past the technical problem to what the finished image will actually communicate, and to adjust the method to preserve the communication rather than the specification. "I'll match the surrounding surface to the depression depth in that corner," you say. "You'll have consistent background across the full area." "Good," Nak says. He straightens and looks at the rest of the panel. "The rest?" "Standard. 2-3 days for final tolerance." He nods and goes back to panel 2. You return to your work. The conversation was brief. It contained no unnecessary words. This is how work communication functions on this site. The economy of language between men who share a technical vocabulary and do not need to fill silence with anything other than the next action. You spend the rest of the morning working the top left corner down to the floor of the depression, a delicate operation because you are removing material from the area around the depression rather than from the depression itself, and the risk is always of going too far and creating a new problem below the level of the original one. You do not go too far. By the time the midday bell sounds, the corner is resolved. The surface across the full area of the depression is now consistent. Not at the depth you originally intended, but consistent, which is what matters. You eat your midday rice in the gallery itself, sitting on the floor with your back against the opposite wall, looking at the panel. This is where you eat when you are in the middle of work that has been going well. You do not want to lose the continuity of the surface in your memory by walking away from it. From across the gallery, at this distance, the panel looks nearly finished to an untrained eye. The roughness of the initial dressing is mostly gone. The surface has a coherent flatness. But you know what is still there. The micro-ridge 2 meters from the right edge where the initial dressing changed angle. The slight hollow near the center bottom where the stone grain runs diagonal to the cut. The remaining high points distributed across the upper register. You know where all of them are. You finish your rice and pick up the fine chisel. The afternoon work is slower and more precise than the morning. You have moved from gross reduction to finish work, and the tools have changed to match. The wide blade chisel goes back in the roll. You work now with a medium blade and a lighter mallet, and later you will move to the narrowest blade you own, a tool with an edge barely wider than your thumb, used for the final micro-adjustments that bring the surface to within the tolerance the sculptors require. The tolerance specification for bas relief background surfaces on this project, communicated to the surface preparation crews by the master builders and originally derived from the Royal Engineers design standards, is flatness within 2 millimeters across any 1 meter span. 2 millimeters. Across a panel 18 meters wide and 4 meters tall. Achieved entirely by hand, eye, straight edge, and the knowledge in your fingers of how this stone behaves under this chisel at this angle. You work through the afternoon with the concentration that this kind of tolerance requires. The sounds of the site move around you at a remove, the distant shouts of the transport crews, the rhythmic knocking from the upper scaffold where the coping block work is continuing, the closer sound of Knock's chisel working the surface of panel 2, but none of it quite reaches you. You are in the stone. This is the only way to describe it. At a certain depth of concentration, the panel and the tool and the judgment of each strike merge into something that is no longer quite separable. You are not thinking about the stone. You are simply present to it. Your father called this the moment when the work becomes prayer. You understood what he meant only after he was gone. He died on a building site, not this one, a smaller temple project near your home village, a local commission for a district official of middling status, a single block. A rope failure. He was 51 years old, and he had been doing this work for 38 years, and the rope did not know this. You were 22. You had been on the Angkor Wat site for 5 years. You did not go back for the funeral. The site did not give leave for deaths. You found out through a message carried by a returning worker from the Eastern District 3 weeks after the fact. You do not think about this often. When you do, it arrives not as grief exactly, but as a kind of weight distributed through your hands, the way your father's knowledge is present in the way you hold a chisel, in the diagnostic tap you use before committing to a cut, in the cross-light habit he taught you when you were 12. He is in your hands. You keep working. Late in the afternoon, when the light is failing in the gallery and you are working by feel as much as sight, you make the final pass across the panel with the straight edge. The gaps are gone. Across the full 18 meters, across the full 4-meter height, the surface is within tolerance. The corners are consistent. The zone around the depression in the top left corner is correctly managed. The diagonal grain sections are flat. The center bottom hollow has been resolved by bringing the surrounding surface down to meet it. You stand back and look at it in the last of the gallery light. Tomorrow Knock will come to this panel with his fine tools and his years of training, and he will begin to find, inside this flat stone surface you have prepared, the armies of Kurukshetra, the elephants and the infantry and the chariots and the banner bearers, figures that will still be legible on this wall, long after every person now living has turned to dust. You do not know this, but you have prepared the surface for it. You roll your tools and walk toward the gate. The fourth morning on the southern gallery begins before the bell. You are already awake when it sounds, already sitting upright on your mat, already thinking about the micro ridge 2 meters from the right edge of panel 3 that you identified yesterday in the last of the light and did not have time to address. It is the kind of thing that sits in a mason's mind overnight. Not with anxiety, with the attention of unfinished work, the way a carpenter lies awake thinking about a joint that is not yet true, or a rope maker replays the tension pattern on a length that did not feel right. The work continues in the body even when the body is supposed to be resting. You eat quickly before the morning ration, some cold rice left from the previous evening, eaten standing outside the sleeping area in the gray pre-dawn light, and go to the southern gallery before most of the crew has assembled. The gallery is empty at this hour except for the ambient noise of the outer site. The panel is in shadow. The morning light has not yet reached this corridor, but you know exactly where the ridge is, and you crouch in front of it and check it in the dark. It is still there. Of course it is still there. Stone does not change overnight, but there is a reassurance in confirming that your memory of the surface matches the surface itself, that what you held in mind through the night is actually what is present in the stone this morning. Your memory is correct. You pick up the fine chisel and begin by feel before the light arrives. This is something your father did and something you learned without being taught it. The capacity to work stone in low light, navigating by touch and by the sound of the chisel against the surface. In near darkness, the ear becomes more precise. You can hear the difference between a strike on a high point, a slightly brighter, shorter response, and the deeper, more settled tone when the blade is running across a correctly dressed surface. The darkness removes the visual information and leaves only what the sound tells you. By the time the morning light begins to enter the gallery from the eastern end, you have addressed the ridge and brought it to level. You confirm it with the straight edge in the new light. Correct. You move to the remaining work on panel 3, the scatter of small high points across the upper register, the diagonal grain section near the center, the final verification passes that will confirm the entire surface is within tolerance before you call it done. The gallery fills around you. Knack arrives with his cutting team, 2 assistants and a senior sculptor in his own right, a man named Viesna, who is perhaps 50, and who specializes in the battle scenes that fill most of Panel 3's designated imagery. Viesna sets up his reference drawings, thin sheets of prepared palm leaf on which the design has been sketched in charcoal, and begins his assessment of the panel that Knack has already been working on for 2 days. You hear them discussing the imagery in technical terms, the depth of cut for the chariot wheels, the angle of the infantry spear shafts, the way the figure hierarchy in a massed battle scene is managed by position on the register rather than by relative size. The Battle of Kurukshetra is the largest battle in the Mahabharata. It lasted 18 days. It involved, according to the text, millions of warriors, though the Khmer sculptors render this through the visual convention of ordered rows, soldiers in formation, their numbers implied by repetition and rhythm rather than actual multitude. The sculptors of this site have developed a visual language for depicting scale that works within the physical constraint of a stone panel. The suggestion of infinity through the formal repetition of individual figures, each one distinct enough to be a person, each one identical enough to become part of a mass. You have watched this visual language take shape over 11 years. You have prepared dozens of surfaces for it, You are not a sculptor. You do not pretend to understand what Nak and Vyasna do in the way they understand it. But you have been adjacent to this work long enough to see how it functions, how the image emerges from the surface not as something imposed from outside, but as something that was already present in the stone and is being found. The sculptors, when you have watched them, often stop and look for long periods before cutting again. The looking is part of the work. They are reading something in the stone that is not yet visible to anyone else. Your work is different. You make the surface ready to be read. You remove the information that would interfere with the reading. You give the sculptor a silence on which the image can speak. The surface makes the figure possible. Without the surface, there is no figure. The afternoon completes itself in the familiar rhythm of final verification work. You pull the straight edge across the panel in a grid, every meter in both directions, and each time the result comes back within tolerance. The surface is consistent. The zones that required special management are all resolved. At the hour before the work bell, you go to find Nak. He is in the Panel 2 section, working with a fine pick on the lower register of what is becoming. Under his hands, a line of marching infantry. The figures are barely begun, suggestions of form, the first removal of background material, but already the rhythm of them is legible. Panel 3 is ready, you tell him. He does not look up from the infantry. Tomorrow morning, he says. It's ready now, you say. You can start this afternoon if you want the light. He does look up at that. He looks at you and then past you toward the Panel 3 section, assessing something in the quality of the light at this hour. I'll look at it in the morning, he says. The morning light is better for the initial reading. You nod. This is his judgment to make. The top left corner, you say. I worked it to the depression floor, 4 millimeters lower than the nominal surface across about this wide. You indicate the span with your hands. Nak nods. He already knows this from the earlier conversation, but it is worth confirming before he begins. I'll adjust the elephant registration, he says. It won't show. You believe him. You collect your tools and walk toward the gate. The evening sky tonight is different from recent evenings. There are clouds building to the south and west, the first serious clouds of what will become the wet season, still weeks away but already announcing themselves in this annual pattern of gradual accumulation. The monsoon comes to Angkor between May and October, filling the Tonle Sap Lake to 4 times its dry season size, flooding the rice paddies, driving some of the outdoor construction work indoors or halting it entirely. The building does not stop during the wet season. It slows. You have worked 6 wet seasons on this site. The rain changes the stone. The moisture content in the upper surfaces alters the density slightly, makes the sandstone fractionally more responsive under the chisel, changes the sound of each strike in a way you registered your first wet season and have worked with ever since. You do not find it worse, just different. Each season has its own relationship with the material. The clouds build in the south as you walk, their undersides catching the last light and turning the orange-violet that comes at the end of dry season days when the air is still clear enough to carry the light cleanly. You walk toward camp. The clouds are building. The rains will come in their own time. The summons comes at dawn. Not from Van, not through a junior overseer with a palm leaf notebook. A priest comes to the workers' camp himself. He is a young Brahmin, perhaps 25, shaved head, wearing the white cotton of a temple initiate, with the sacred thread crossing his chest from left shoulder to right hip. He speaks in the formal Khmer of the court, not the working dialect you use with your crew, and he pronounces your name as though reading it from a document. Dara, Mason, you are required at the inner sanctuary at the hour of preparation. The hour of preparation is the hour before the priests begin the morning rituals, roughly 40 minutes before the first prayers. It is in the site's daily rhythm, before the work bell, before breakfast, before most of the workforce has emerged from the sleeping area. You are already awake. You sleep lightly on this site. You have slept lightly your entire adult life on construction projects because the habit of early waking is protective. A man who wakes first has a few minutes to assess what the day will bring before the day begins to happen to him. "I'll come now," you say. You take your tool roll without eating. The priest leads you through the outer enclosure, through the second enclosure, and into the inner gallery complex, through a sequence of doorways that get progressively narrower and higher as you move toward the center, as though the building is drawing you inward by degrees, compressing the space around you to indicate that what lies at the center is something that requires a different kind of attention than what happens on the outside. To enter the central tower itself, the main prasart, you pass through the eastern entrance, a doorway framed by carved stone columns and a carved stone lintel depicting a scene from the life of Vishnu. The doorway is not large. You have to duck slightly. Inside, the air changes. Outside, the air smells of stone dust and the smoke from the workers' cook fires and the distant water of the moat. Inside the central tower, the air is cool and still and carries the residue of incense. Not a heavy smell, but a persistent one, the smell of years of burning accumulated in enclosed stone. The inner chamber is small. This surprises people who have not been inside before. From the outside, the central tower is the dominant feature of the entire complex, 65 meters tall, visible for kilometers across the Angkor Plain, the axis of the cosmic mountain, the architectural statement that the center of the universe is here. Inside, it is a room approximately 4 meters by 4 meters. Stone walls, stone floor, stone ceiling, corbelled upward into the tower shaft above. Though you cannot see the top of the shaft in the darkness, it disappears into shadow far above the reach of the oil lamps that burn in bronze holders at each corner of the room. At the center of the room is the image. It is Vishnu, life-size or close to it, a standing figure of dark stone, dressed in the actual garments of worship, real silk, real gold ornaments, a garland of fresh flowers placed that morning by the priests, which is why the air carries a sweetness underneath the incense. The face of the image looks toward the eastern doorway, toward the sunrise. You do not look at the image for long. This is not disrespect. It is awareness of your position. You are here to fix stones, not to have an audience with a god. You look at the floor. The threshold stones of the eastern doorway are 2 flat sandstone slabs, each approximately 2 meters long and half a meter wide, set flush with the floor of the inner chamber and extending slightly outward over the sill of the doorway. They are the stones your feet crossed to enter this room. They are the stones the king's feet cross during the festival rituals when he comes to make his devotions at the central image. You crouch and put your straight edge across the joint between them. You can feel it before you see it, the slight rocking of the straight edge as it crosses the zone where one stone sits fractionally higher than the other. You sight along the straight edge in the lamplight. The deviation is approximately 3 millimeters across a span of perhaps 40 centimeters, the area near the center of the joint where the settling has concentrated. The outer edges of both stones are level with each other. Only this central zone has shifted. 3 millimeters. In most contexts, 3 millimeters is nothing. On a building site, 3 millimeters is within any reasonable tolerance for exterior stonework. But here, in the inner sanctuary, in lamplight, on a floor the king walks on, 3 millimeters catches the light at the wrong angle and creates a shadow, a visible line, a visible imperfection, a visible indication that something has moved. The god's house should not show that it has moved. You place your palm on each stone and press. The stones do not give. They have settled into their new position, and they are stable there. The deviation is not a structural problem. It is a surface problem. The stone that has risen slightly has done so because the substrate beneath it, the laterite foundation block on which it rests, has shifted by a fraction under the load of the surrounding structure settling into itself. The laterite is stable now. The sandstone threshold will not shift further. You only need to address the surface. The priest who brought you here has retreated to the doorway and stands watching. Behind you, through the doorway, you can feel the morning beginning outside, the sounds of the site waking up, distant voices, the first knock of tools somewhere in the second enclosure. How long? The priest asks. You think about it. 2 days, you say. Today I assess and prepare. Tomorrow I finish. The ceremony of the 4th day cannot be delayed, he says. I'll be done before the 4th day. He nods and steps back outside the doorway. You are alone in the inner chamber with the image of Vishnu and the problem in the floor. You unroll your toolkit on the floor beside the threshold stones and look at what you have brought. For work in this space, enclosed, low light, restricted movement, zero tolerance for error, you will use only 4 tools. The fine chisel, the narrowest blade you own, a small wooden mallet light enough to strike with one hand, and the straight edge. No heavy mallet. The vibration from a heavy mallet strike in this enclosed stone chamber would travel through the floor and the walls and the image platform, and you do not know what effect that would have on the image mount. You will work by hand pressure as much as by strike. This is slower. It is also more controllable. You begin with a diagnostic pass, tapping the surface of the raised stone with your knuckle at regular intervals, listening to the tone. A stone with good substrate contact produces a solid, dense sound. A stone with any void beneath it, any space where the substrate has pulled away from the stone's underside, produces a hollow note, a slight resonance that sounds wrong in a way you cannot quite describe, but immediately recognize. The raised threshold stone sounds solid across most of its length. Near the raised zone, at the center, you hear the note change slightly, not a full hollow, but a marginal one, a slight reduction in density. This tells you that the substrate contact in this zone is not perfect. The stone rose slightly because it lost some substrate contact, and it lost contact because the laterite foundation shifted. This is useful information. If you cut the raised surface down without addressing the substrate void, you risk the stone settling further over time, perhaps not by much, perhaps not soon, but the potential is there. The correct approach is to reduce the raised zone to level and then introduce a grouting material into any void to stabilize the contact. The grouting material available on this site for this purpose is a mixture of fine lime and laterite powder worked to a stiff paste. It is not mortar in the modern sense. It does not set to a permanent hardness, but rather consolidates over time under the weight of the stone. It is used in the foundation courses of the temple for exactly this kind of settlement management. You will need some. You spend a few minutes in the inner chamber simply measuring the extent of the raised zone, the exact profile of the deviation, the distance from the joint to the wall on each side. You do this by eye and by feel and by the straight edge, and you hold the measurements in memory rather than marking them anywhere. Marking the floor of the inner sanctuary with a charcoal line is not something you will do. Then you go out to find the lime paste. The sun is properly up now. The site is fully active. You locate the foundation supply store, a covered shed near the eastern enclosure wall where materials for repair and maintenance work are kept separate from the main construction supplies, and speak to the materials overseer, a compact, efficient man named Boran who knows the inventory of his store the way you know the tools in your role. Lime paste, fine grade, you say, a small amount. Boran looks at you. Inner sanctuary repair. Yes. He goes into the store without further question and returns with a clay pot sealed with a cloth cover, perhaps half a liter of material, more than enough for what you need. You carry it back to the inner chamber. The priest has returned and is standing near the image, performing what appears to be a private recitation, lips moving slightly, eyes focused on the middle distance, hands in a specific position at his chest. He does not acknowledge you entering. You crouch at the threshold stones and work. The reduction of the raised zone is the first task. With the fine chisel and the light mallet, you begin to take down the high side of the deviation, the millimeter or two of surface that stands above where it should be. The cuts are very small. You are removing material in increments you can barely see, feeling the surface between each pass of the chisel. The sound in the enclosed chamber is different from the galleries. Outside, the sound of chisel work disperses into open air. In here, it bounces off 4 stone walls and comes back to you from every direction at once, a doubled, reflected sound that has a slightly unreal quality, as though the stone itself is responding. You adjust the force of your strikes downward to compensate. Lighter, more controlled, less mallet, more hand pressure directing the blade. It is the most precise work you have ever done on this site. The morning passes inside the 4-meter room with the image of Vishnu and the oil lamps and the smell of incense and flowers and the near-silent work of your fine chisel against the floor. At intervals, the young priest performs parts of the morning ritual, lighting additional incense, refreshing the water in a small stone basin near the image, reciting passages in Sanskrit, which is the ritual language of the Brahmin priests and which you do not speak. You work around the ritual without interfering with it. The priest works around your presence without acknowledging it. You are both here for the same reason, the maintenance and correct functioning of the god's house, but you are operating in entirely separate registers of that purpose. By midday, the raised zone has been reduced to within 0.5 millimeter of level. You stop and drink from your water skin, which you brought in with you. Then you continue. The final 0.5 millimeter takes as long as the first 2 millimeters combined. This is always true of final tolerance work. The gross reduction is relatively fast. The final approach to specification is slow, because each cut affects the reading of everything around it, and each pass of the straight edge gives you more information about what remains, and the more you can see of what remains, the more precisely you must respond to it. You work the surface in passes: chisel, straight edge, fingertip, chisel again. The gap under the straight edge narrows. A hand's width of stone from the floor, in the lamplight of the inner chamber, with Vishnu looking over your shoulder toward the eastern door. You take the last fraction of material off and put the straight edge across the joint. It rocks once, slightly. You find the point, a zone perhaps the width of 2 fingers, at the outer edge of your reduction zone, where the surface is still fractionally high. You address it with a single, careful pass. The straight edge goes across the joint again. It does not rock. You check it 3 times. 3 times, no movement. You sit back on your heels and look at the floor. The joint between the 2 threshold stones is level. The surface is correct. The deviation is gone. You mix a small amount of the lime paste to a slightly thinner consistency than it came from the pot and, using a thin wooden spatula, work it into the small gap at the edge of the raised stone, feeding the paste toward the substrate void, filling the space, giving the stone a complete bed of material to rest on. The paste will take several weeks to consolidate fully, but it is in place. You clean the residue from the surface of the stone with a damp cloth and make a final inspection. The floor of the inner chamber shows no sign of your presence. No chisel marks, no paste residue, no variation in the surface that a walking eye would catch. Just stone and lamplight and the smell of incense. You roll your tools and stand. Your back aches from the hours of crouching. Your knees, pressed against the stone floor for most of the day, are stiff. You straighten slowly, feeling the alignment of your spine returning to its normal arrangement. The priest looks at you for the first time since you entered. "Finished?" he asks. "The surface is done," you say. "The paste needs a few weeks. Don't subject it to heavy foot traffic before then if you can help it." He considers this, the ceremony of the 4th day. "Walk on the outer edges of the threshold," you say. "Avoid the center joint." He nods and steps out. You leave the inner chamber. Outside, the afternoon is bright and hot, and the contrast with the cool, enclosed lamplight hits you immediately. The warmth, the noise, the smell of the site in full operation. After a day inside the inner sanctuary, the ordinary activity of the construction site feels almost overwhelming in its scale and volume. You stand for a moment in the doorway of the inner gallery, letting your eyes adjust. Then you walk toward the outer enclosure. Halfway across the second enclosure courtyard, something is different. The site has changed its rhythm in the past few hours. You can feel it before you identify what it is. The noise level is lower than it should be at this hour. The workers moving through the courtyard have the slightly tightened posture of people who are aware of something happening outside the ordinary. You stop a transport worker you recognize, a large, quiet man called Sorn, who has been on the site for 7 years. "What's happening?" you ask. Sorn looks at you with an expression you cannot quite read. "The king is coming," he says. You look at him. "Today?" "This afternoon. Word came from the court 2 hours ago. He's inspecting the sanctuary progress." Sorn pauses. "He doesn't come often." "You know this. Suryavarman II has visited this site 3 times in the 11 years you have been here. Each visit is preceded by a flurry of preparation. The site is cleaned, the overseers double-check everything, the priests perform additional ceremonies. Workers do not line up for the king the way they might for a military procession, but the entire site reshapes itself around the awareness of his presence. You have seen him twice, at a distance. Once on the main causeway, passing through in a procession, elephants, soldiers, court officials, and the king at the center, carried in a palanquin, visible briefly as a flash of gold cloth between the bodyguards. Once at the edge of the inner gallery, where you were working, and he passed perhaps 30 meters away. You could not see his face clearly. What you saw was the effect of his presence on the men around him, the priests and overseers who moved with him, who oriented their bodies toward him the way plants orient toward light. A Devaraja moves differently through the world than other people. Or perhaps everyone around a Devaraja moves differently. You are not sure which. You continue toward the outer enclosure. The preparation for the king's arrival is already visible. A work crew is sweeping the stone surface of the main causeway with long-handled brushes, removing the construction dust that accumulates daily. Another crew is removing equipment from the areas of the inner gallery the king will pass through. You go to the workers' camp and set down your tool roll. You sit outside your sleeping area and wait. An hour later, you hear it, the distant sound of drums and the higher sound of the conch shell horns that announce the king's procession. The sound travels across the flat plain of Angkor with a clarity that makes it seem closer than it is. By the time the procession is actually crossing the main causeway, you have been hearing it for 10 minutes. The camp is quiet. Workers have drifted to positions where they can see something, near the fence line, near the eastern gate, without being in the way. This is not organized. It simply happens, the natural gathering of people who are aware that something significant is moving through the world near them. You stay where you are. You do not need to see the king. You fixed the floor of his God's house today. That is enough. In the distance, the drums move across the causeway and into the outer enclosure. The conch horns rise and fall. Somewhere in the inner gallery complex you cannot see, the priests are performing the welcoming ceremonies, and the king is walking through the spaces that tens of thousands of workers have built over the course of 3 decades, and his feet are on the floors that your hands have prepared. The sound of the procession enters the inner enclosure. Then the causeway is quiet again, and the only sound is the ordinary sound of a construction site in late afternoon. You pick up your tool roll and secure it for the night. The day after the king's visit, the site feels different. Not quieter. If anything, there is more urgency in the way the overseers move through the galleries. More frequency to the inspection passes by the master builders. A king who has visited a project and found it proceeding correctly is a king whose standards have been confirmed. The workforce understands, without anyone saying it directly, that the standard the king observed is now the permanent record. The work continues at that level or above it. You feel this in the speed at which your next assignment comes. Van finds you before breakfast. Northern Gallery, column base sections 4 through 7, he says. The stone setters finished last week, and the bases need final dressing before the column drums go on. Master Che inspected them yesterday and sent them back. This is significant. Master Che sending work back is not common. He does not do it to demonstrate authority. He does it when the work is genuinely below the standard the building requires. What's the problem, you ask? The leveling is off on section 6, Van says. The base is proud on the north side by enough that the column drum won't sit true, and section 4 has tool marks from the initial dressing that weren't cleared. You know section 6. You passed it 2 weeks ago when you were taking a different route through the northern gallery, and you noticed, without stopping, that the base looked rough. You noted it the way you note many things on this site, as information that might be relevant later. It is relevant now. I can start this morning, you say. You need to start this morning, Van says. The column drums go up in 5 days. 5 days for 4 column base sections is reasonable if the problems are what Van described, not catastrophic errors, but standard finishing deficiencies from a stone-setting crew that may have been under pressure to move quickly. You go to the northern gallery with your tool roll and begin at section 4, where the tool marks are the simpler of the two problems. The tool marks are from a rough chisel, a wide, aggressive blade used for rapid material removal that should have been followed by finer work and was not. The marks are visible in raking light as a series of parallel grooves, not deep but present, running across the upper surface of the column base at an angle inconsistent with the natural presentation of the stone. A column base is a transition element. It sits on the floor and receives the column drum above it, and it is visible in the finished building at foot level. On these columns in the northern gallery, the base is carved with a simple profile, a flat upper surface that the column sits on, and a stepped lower section that transitions to the floor. The flat upper surface is the critical dimension. The column drum will be placed on it and must be perfectly level or the column will lean, and a leaning column on this site is not acceptable. The tool marks do not affect the levelness, they affect the appearance. You address them with the fine chisel and a careful, methodical pass, working along the grain of the marks rather than against them, lifting the ridges between the grooves rather than trying to cut down into the grooves themselves. This approach is faster and cleaner because you are not creating new material removal, just resolving the existing pattern. Section 4 takes most of the morning. You move to section 6 after the midday ration. The levelness problem on section 6 is more demanding. You confirm Van's assessment with your straight edge. The north side of the base is elevated by approximately 2.5 millimeters across a span of about 60 centimeters. This is enough, in a column of significant height, to produce a visible lean at the top. The column drums for these bases are approximately 90 centimeters tall, and the full column, with capital, will be perhaps 3 meters. A 2.5 millimeter tilt at the base, propagated through 3 meters of height, produces a deviation at the top of between 7 and 8 millimeters. 7 millimeters. In a corridor of aligned columns, a single column leaning 7 millimeters from true would be visible to a careful eye within moments of entering the gallery. You begin the reduction of the north side. This is more complex work than the tool marks because you are dealing with levelness across a significant span. The full diameter of the column base, which is approximately 90 centimeters, and you must maintain the overall flatness of the surface while selectively reducing one side. The risk is always of creating a new deviation in the process of correcting the existing one. You work in passes. Each pass with the fine chisel takes down a controlled amount from the north side. Each pass is followed by a check with the straight edge across the full diameter. You are watching for two things simultaneously: the reduction of the north side elevation and the maintenance of flatness across the whole surface. The afternoon light moves through the northern gallery as you work. This gallery faces south, which means the light enters from the opposite wall through the doorways and window openings and comes across the column base surfaces at a useful angle, not direct sun, which flattens the surface information, but the reflected light of a bright afternoon, which has just enough raking quality to show you surface variation clearly. You use this light. By the third hour of the afternoon, the north side elevation is down to within 0.5 millimeter. By the fourth hour, you are at the final adjustment, the last fraction that separates acceptable from correct. You make the final pass. The straight edge goes across the base. No rock. You check it in multiple orientations: north, south, east, west, diagonal both ways. Each time, the straight edge sits flat against the stone without movement. The base is level. You sit back and look at it. In 5 days, a column drum weighing perhaps 400 kilograms will be placed on this surface. It will be leveled and adjusted, and then the drums above it will follow, and the capital will go on last, and then the corridor above will be roofed, and the column will be enclosed in the building it holds up, and you will never see this base again. No one will see this base again. The column will stand on it, and the roof will sit on the column, and the gallery will be whole, and none of the people who walk through it, not the priests, not the court officials, not the king, not the pilgrims who will come from distant parts of the empire, will know that there was a problem here, or that someone spent an afternoon correcting it. The building simply works. That is all. You collect your tools in the last of the afternoon light and make your way toward the gate. Your hands smell of stone dust, and your shoulders ache in the way they ache after a day of close, controlled work. Not the heavy ache of transport labor, but the tighter ache of sustained precision, different muscles, different quality of tiredness. At the gate, the overseer marks your tally stick. You cross the causeway in the falling dark. The air tonight has a different weight to it, a density, the suggestion of water not yet arrived. You have lived through 28 wet seasons, and you know this feeling. the atmosphere thickening in the weeks before the first rains, the smell of the soil beginning to change, the birds moving differently across the plain. The rains are perhaps 2 weeks away. When they come, the moat will fill higher, and the canals will run fast, and the transport of stone from the river landing will become easier in some ways and harder in others, and the scaffolding will be checked twice as often for lashing failures caused by the swelling of the wet bamboo. And the work will continue. It always continues. You reach camp and sit outside your sleeping area in the last of the light, your tools rolled beside you, your back against the wooden post of the sleeping shelter. The sounds of the site settle into their evening rhythm. Fewer voices, the distant sound of cooking fires in the camp, the occasional call of a night bird from the trees beyond the outer enclosure wall. Tomorrow you will finish sections 5 and 7. The day after, section 6 will receive its column drum. And somewhere in the ordinary accumulation of days, the building will become more than it was when you arrived here this morning. Stone by stone, surface by surface, millimeter by careful millimeter. This is how it is built. This is how it has always been built. This is how everything worth building is built. The assignment comes on a morning when the clouds are lower than they have been. Not rain yet, but the sky has changed. The high, dry season blue has given way to something heavier, a white-gray ceiling that sits closer to the ground and makes the towers of the central sanctuary look taller than they are. Van does not find you this morning. You find him. He is standing at the base of the central stairway of the inner enclosure, looking up at the scaffolding on the central tower's upper section, and when you approach, he turns and looks at you with an expression that is not quite readable. Master Che reassigned you, he says. Upper sanctuary. You're going up. You look at the stairway. The central stairway of the inner enclosure rises at 70 degrees from horizontal, steep enough that ascending it requires your hands as well as your feet, pressing palms against the stone risers as you climb to keep your body close to the stairface. The steps are narrow, perhaps 20 centimeters deep, and they rise in a continuous, unbroken run of 61 steps to the upper terrace level. From the upper terrace, the scaffolding around the central tower begins. What section, you say? Corbel course, north face, the corbelled vault over the inner corridor. The stones are cut and staged, but the fitting crew needs a precision man for the final adjustment of the key courses. The corbelling doesn't close true, and they've been fighting it for a week. You know what this means. A corbelled vault is built by projecting each successive course of stone slightly further inward than the course below it. Not a true arch, which transfers its load and compression through a keystone, but a cantilevered stacking that relies on the weight of the stone above each projecting course to hold it in place. The Khmer engineers use corbelling throughout this structure because it can be built without the temporary wooden centering that a true arch requires. But corbelling has a precise geometry that must be maintained across the full width of the vault, and if the projections are even slightly inconsistent across the courses, the vault will not close at the crown and the gap will be visible. A gap in the corbelling of the inner corridor of the central sanctuary is not acceptable. I'll go up, you say. Van looks at you for a moment. It's high, he says. I know. The corbel coursework is at the upper section of the inner corridor, which means working at approximately 45 meters above the terrace level. The terrace itself sits 13 meters above the ground, which means the total height above the ground where you will be working is close to 60 meters. You pick up your tool roll and go to the stairway. The ascent of the central stairway takes longer than you expect. This is not because you are slow. It is because the stairway demands a particular kind of physical attention that cannot be rushed. Hands and feet working together, body angled toward the stone face, weight distributed carefully across each step, because at this angle a missed footing is serious. You have seen workers come down these stairs faster than they intended, the momentum taking them before they could recover, and the stone of the lower enclosure courtyard below is not forgiving. You climb steadily. At the top of the stairway, you step onto the upper terrace and straighten. The view stops you. The Angkor Plain extends in every direction to the horizon. To the north and west, the Great Western Beret, a rectangular body of water 8 kilometers long and 2 kilometers wide, built by a previous king and still in use, catches the gray morning sky and holds it flat, a mirror set into the earth. To the south and east, the plains of rice paddies stretch to the limit of visibility. The fields still dry at this season, the brown earth waiting for the rains that the sky is promising. Scattered through the fields are the rooftops of villages and the occasional smaller temple, local shrines and district temples, each one oriented toward Angkor the way plants orient toward light. Closer in, the rooftops of Angkor itself, the city of perhaps 300,000 people that surrounds the temple complex. Not a city of permanent stone buildings, mostly, but a city of wooden structures, bamboo walls and thatched roofs arranged along the grid of roads and canals that the royal engineers laid out over decades. The stone buildings are the temples and the royal enclosure. Everything else is organic, impermanent, subject to the rain and the heat and the insects that work constantly on organic material in this climate. The permanent things are stone. The impermanent things are everything else. You look at the 5 towers of the central sanctuary rising around and above you. From the ground, the towers are abstract, too large, too far away to read in detail. From up here, on the terrace at their base, they are immediate. The stone is close enough to touch. The corbelled courses that ring each tower at its upper section are visible in their progression, each course stepping slightly inward, the geometry of the cantilever made legible by the scale and the closeness. The scaffolding on the north face of the central tower rises from the terrace level to the approximate height of the corbel zone, a dense grid of bamboo poles and working platforms extending 45 meters above where you are standing. You walk to the base of the scaffold and look up through it. The scaffold crew chief, a wiry, gray-haired person named Chan who has been managing scaffolding on elevated sections of this site for 8 years, comes to meet you. Dara, he says, mason, precision work. Yes. You've been up before? 20 meters, transport scaffold. He looks at you with an assessment that is not condescending, just practical. A man who manages safety at height knows the difference between people who are comfortable up high and people who are not, and he checks before he sends someone up. The first platform is at 12 meters from here, he says, Stop there and tell me how you feel. No pressure to go higher until you've established your footing. You nod. He shows you the handholds and the sequence, which poles are the structural verticals and which are the bracing, where the platforms are, where the lashings that must not be used as handholds are located. This briefing takes perhaps 10 minutes, and you absorb it the way you absorb any technical instruction on this site, completely, without question, because the people who have been here longer than you know things you do not, and the correct response to that is to listen. Then you climb. The bamboo scaffold is different from stone. Stone under your hands is inert. It will not move, will not flex, will not respond to the pressure of your grip except by being exactly what it is. The bamboo scaffold under your hands is alive in comparison. It has give, a slight flex in the vertical poles when you transfer weight to them, a micro vibration when the wind moves across the structure that you feel in your palms before you feel it in your feet. You do not find this alarming. You find it informative. The scaffold is telling you what it is doing. Stone tells you nothing. It simply is. The scaffold speaks, and you learn to listen to it, and you understand within the first 12 meters of climbing what the structure is, and how it moves, and how to move with it, rather than against it. At the first platform, 12 meters above the terrace, nearly 25 meters above the ground, you stop as Chan instructed. You stand on the platform and look out. The view from here is wider than from the terrace. The reservoirs catch more sky. The city of Angkor spreads further in every direction, and you can see the coherent geometry of the canal system. The straight lines of the waterways cutting across the organic irregularity of the rice fields and the tree lines, the engineering of the water management system made visible as a pattern that is only legible from above. The Khmer Empire's agricultural productivity, its capacity to feed 300,000 people in this city alone, depends on this water. The Baray reservoirs store the monsoon rains and release them during the dry season through a system of sluices and canals that irrigate the paddies across a precisely managed schedule. The royal engineers who designed this system worked at a scale of planning that you can only appreciate from up here, the whole thing visible at once. The relationship between the reservoir and the fields and the canals and the city readable as a single integrated design. From the ground you see one canal. From here you see the system. You feel stable on the platform. You look up at the remaining scaffold above you and keep climbing. The second platform is at 24 meters above the terrace. The third at 36. The work area is at 45 meters, close to the corbel zone, where the scaffolding extends outward from the tower face to create a working platform directly adjacent to the corbelled stone courses. You reach it. You stand on the platform and do not look down for a moment. Not because you are afraid, because you are establishing your relationship with the platform before you add any other information. Your feet on the bamboo. The slight flex of the platform under your weight. The sound of the wind at this height. Different from the ground, cleaner, without the buffering of the buildings and trees below. The distant sound of the site work far below. Coming up in fragments, the familiar sounds made strange by distance. Then you look down. The terrace is 45 meters below. The ground is nearly 60. The workers on the ground are small, moving in the purposeful patterns of their work. each one trailing a thin shadow in the gray morning light. You look back at the stone. The corbelled courses of the north face of the central tower are immediately in front of you, close enough to put your hand on. You put your hand on them. The stone is the same Phnom Kulen sandstone as everything else on this structure. The same golden-orange color, the same density under your palm, the same temperature from the night-cooled air. Up here it is slightly cooler than at ground level. The wind takes the heat away before it can accumulate. You read the corbelling problem. It is visible to your eye immediately, which means it is more significant than you were told. A gap in the corbel sequence at the intended crown, not large, perhaps 8 millimeters across the full width of the vault, but consistent and symmetrical, which means the error is in the geometry of the projections rather than a single misplaced stone. You trace the course sequence upward with your eye. The error begins 7 courses below the crown. 7 courses below the crown. The projection rate, the amount by which each course steps inward beyond the one below it, increased very slightly, not visibly on its own, but compounded across 7 courses. The incremental increase has brought the 2 sides of the vault to within 8 millimeters of closing, when the design requires them to close completely with a flat-cut stone seated at the crown. The 8 millimeter gap cannot accommodate the crown stone as currently cut. You think about this for a while, crouched on the working platform with the wind moving past you and the ground far below and the stone of the vault directly in front of your face. Recutting the crown stone is the faster solution. It is one stone. You have the tools to do it if someone can bring you a finer blade from the ground. Redistributing the error across the lower 7 courses would be technically cleaner. It corrects the geometric problem at its source, but it requires carefully reducing 7 successive courses in sequence, each reduction calculated against the reduction above it, and any error in the sequence propagates. You choose the recut of the crown stone, not because it is easier, because in this specific geometry, with the vault as close to closing as it already is, the single stone correction will produce a vault that is structurally correct for the forces it must carry. The crown stone, once recut and seated, will distribute the load correctly to both sides of the corbelling beneath it. The vault will hold. You call down to Chan. I need my narrowest blade and a light mallet, and someone to bring the crown stone up. The crown stone is staged on the 3rd platform, the working platform at 36 meters, waiting for its placement. It has been cut to the original crown dimension, which assumed a perfect closure. It is now wrong by 8 millimeters. Chan sends a runner for your blade. The crown stone, wrapped in cloth to protect its dressed faces, comes up the scaffold in the hands of 2 experienced scaffold workers, who carry it with the careful steadiness of people who have done this before. The stone is placed on the working platform beside you. You unwrap it and examine it. It is a flat stone approximately 60 centimeters wide, 20 centimeters tall, and 40 centimeters deep into the vault. The 2 faces that will contact the corbelled courses on each side have been cut flat and true. The upper face and the lower face are correctly dressed. The problem is the width. You need to remove 4 millimeters from each side, a total of 8 millimeters of width, distributed symmetrically so the stone will close the vault gap without creating uneven bearing on one side or the other. 4 millimeters per side. On a stone this size, at this height, with the tools you have, you pick up the narrow blade. The work on the platform is different from any surface work you have done before. The platform has movement. Not much. Chan's scaffold is well made and well maintained, but there is the microflex of the bamboo and the occasional shift of the wind that presses against you from one direction and then releases, and the awareness of the height that you carry in the back of your body. Not fear, but awareness, a permanent background note of where the ground is. You learn to work within the movement rather than despite it. The narrow blade goes against the side face of the crown stone. You strike. The chip that comes away is perhaps 0.5 millimeter of material, more careful than you needed to be. You are working cautiously at first, establishing the relationship between the tool and the stone in this context, this height, this quality of controlled vibration. You strike again. The stone responds cleanly. You settle into it. The work takes the full morning. Not because it is difficult in itself. Removing 4 millimeters from a flat stone face is not technically demanding. It is demanding because it must be correct, and because each check of the measurement requires holding the straight edge against the stone face in the wind, and because the crown stone must then be test-fitted against the vault opening and the fit assessed before the final material is removed. You test-fit the crown stone 3 times. The first test, 2 millimeters still to come off the right side. The second test, the sides are correct, but the upper face needs a small amount taken off at one corner, where the fit is tight against the corbel above. The third test, the stone drops into the gap and sits. No movement. No rock. No gap visible to your eye on either bearing face. You press the stone in with both hands, not a mallet, just hand pressure, and it seats with the sound of stone against stone and does not move. You sit back on the working platform. The crown stone is in place. The vault is closed. Above you, the tower of the central sanctuary continues to rise. Another 20 meters of corbelled stone, narrowing as it goes, terminating at the pointed lotus bud form of the tower's crown far above your head. Below you, the vault you have just closed will carry the ceiling of the inner corridor for as long as this building stands. You have been at this height for 4 hours. You eat on the platform a handful of cold rice that a scaffold worker brought up with your tool blade, eaten with your back against the tower face and your legs extended on the bamboo platform and the plain of Angkor spread out below you in every direction. The clouds are lower now than they were this morning. You can feel the moisture in them. Not rain, but the anticipation of rain, the heaviness that comes before the first drops of a new wet season. The air at this height has a different smell than the air below. Lighter, less stone dust, more of the vegetable smell of the wet plain and the distant water. You look at the landscape below you. The 5 towers of the central sanctuary are at eye level or below from where you are sitting. You are at the height of the 4th corbelled section, above the level at which the subsidiary towers reach. For a few minutes, in this position on the north face scaffold, you are looking across at the tower tops from the same height, and the geometry of the building is visible to you in a way it is never visible from the ground. The 5 towers form a quincunx, the arrangement of 5 points, one at each corner and one at the center. From this height you can see the full layout, and the relationship between the towers is not an abstraction. You can see how the 4 outer towers frame the central one, how the spacing was calculated to create the right visual relationship at ground level, and how the proportion of the central tower to the outer ones, taller, more massive, but not crushingly so, creates a coherent hierarchy rather than a single dominant form. The engineer who designed this understood something about the relationship between the part and the whole. You understand it now, too. You finish the cold rice. You look at the vault closure one more time. The joint between the crown stone and the corbelled courses on each side is tight and even. No lamplight would catch a shadow in it. No priest walking through the corridor below would see anything except a ceiling that has always been exactly as it is. The descent is slower than the ascent. Coming down a tall scaffold is always slower because gravity is working with you rather than against you, and working with you is more dangerous than working against you. Against gravity, you tire. With gravity, you accelerate. A scaffold worker who rushes the descent is a scaffold worker who arrives at the bottom faster than the scaffold planned for. You come down methodically, platform by platform, hands checking each handhold before weight transfers to it. At the 3rd platform, Chan is waiting. He looks at you, then up at the vault closure above. "Seated?" he says. "Seated," you say. He nods once. This is, from Chan, the equivalent of a significant statement of approval. You continue the descent. At the upper terrace, you step off the scaffold onto the stone and stand upright for a moment. Your legs are slightly unsteady, the physical consequence of spending 4 hours on a moving surface after a lifetime of working on stone that does not move. The stone of the terrace is absolutely still under your feet. You had forgotten, up there, how still stone is. The work bell sounds the end of the afternoon session from somewhere below. You take the central stairway down. Descending at 70 degrees, hands on the stone risers, weight back, each step deliberate. At the bottom of the stairway, in the courtyard of the inner enclosure, you stop and put both hands flat on the ground. This is not a gesture anyone taught you. You have done it every time you have worked at significant height, since your first time on a tall scaffold years ago. Both hands on the ground when you come back down, the ground confirming its own solidity. The stone saying, "You are back, you are here, the height is over." You press your palms against the stone of the inner enclosure courtyard and feel it. Still, absolute, ancient in a way the scaffold can never be. You stand up. Tomorrow you will go back up. The crown stone needs 3 days of observation before Master Che will sign off the vault as complete, checking that the stone has not shifted under the diurnal temperature change of the stone at height, which expands slightly in the day heat and contracts in the night cool and can, in a new placement, produce micro-movement in the first few days. 3 mornings of checking. 3 mornings of climbing. You walk toward the causeway. The clouds above the towers have deepened in color since this morning, and the first smell of rain, not water yet, but the smell of coming water, the smell of wet earth anticipating rain, is moving across the plain from the south. By the time you reach the causeway, the first drops have begun. Not a downpour. The first drops of the wet season are always tentative, a scattering, a testing, the sky deciding whether it is ready. You cross the causeway in the light rain. The water hits the surface of the moat and makes small circles that expand and overlap and are replaced by new ones. You have been waiting for this. The rains have been here for 3 weeks now. The sight is different in the wet season. Not quieter, the work does not stop, but differently textured. The sound of rain on stone is constant, a low, even sound that underlies everything else the way the hum of the moat underlies the ordinary silence of early morning. The scaffolding drips. The stone surfaces that you have spent months preparing are dark with moisture, and the wet stone has a different smell from the dry, cooler, more mineral, the smell of deep earth. You have checked the crown stone vault closure 3 mornings in a row. On the 3rd morning, Master Che himself came up to the working platform. You were not expecting this. Men of Master Che's age and position do not typically climb scaffolding at 45 meters, and the climb for him was visibly difficult. His breath was shorter at the top, and he stood on the platform for a moment, simply recovering before he looked at the vault. Then he looked at the vault. He ran his hand along the joint between the crown stone and the north corbel course. He crouched and sighted along the ceiling surface from the perspective of someone walking through the corridor below. He stood up. "It's good," he said. "You said nothing." "Better than good," he said, which was unusual. Master Che does not add to a positive assessment. He went back down the scaffold without another word. That was 4 days ago. This morning you are on a different assignment. The western approach terrace, the wide cruciform platform that extends outward from the main body of the temple complex toward the western Gopura, the great gateway at the western entrance to the outer enclosure. The terrace is decorated with stone balustrades, and the pedestal sections on the southern side require refinishing where the initial dressing was rushed during the push to complete the approach for an earlier royal visit. The work is familiar: surface preparation, tool marks, levelness adjustment on the pedestal tops. You do it the way you do everything. But this morning, something is different in the quality of the light. It is raining, but lightly, and the rain is coming from the west, which means it blows in across the moat toward you as you work. And the droplets are fine enough that they are more mist than rain, and in this mist the main causeway and the western Gopura behind you are half obscured, and the outer enclosure wall ahead of you is similarly softened, and the whole complex is visible in the way a thing seen through gauze is visible. The lines are there, the forms are there, but the hard edges are dissolved. You stop working for a moment and look at it. In 31 years of your life, 11 of them on this site, you have almost never stopped working to look at something for more than a few seconds. You stop now. The building, seen through rain mist at this scale, from this position on the approach terrace, is different from any other position you have occupied in your 11 years here. You are far enough back that the entire western face is visible, the outer wall, the inner gallery rooflines, the second enclosure, and behind it all the 5 towers of the central sanctuary rising into the gray sky, their upper sections disappearing into the low cloud. It does not look like a building. This is not the right word for what it looks like. It looks like a mountain. Not a metaphor. The architects designed it to be Mount Meru, and standing here in the rain looking at it, you understand for the first time what that means, not as information, but as direct experience. The form in front of you has the weight and the profile and the inevitability of a mountain. It does not seem like something that was built. It seems like something that was always here and has only just now become fully visible. You are part of this. Not the towers. You did not build the towers. You finished a vault closure in one of them, and you know which vault it is, and you know what work that required, and that knowledge is yours alone. But the towers are not the whole building. The third gallery, with its bas relief panels, you prepared surfaces in there. The northern approach columns, you corrected the base levelness on 4 of them. The inner sanctuary threshold, you re-leveled 2 stones that the king walks on, and the paste you introduced into the substrate void is still there, consolidating, holding the stones in their correct position. Your work is in this building in a dozen places. None of them are marked. None of them are visible to anyone who does not know where to look. But the building works because of them. You pick up your chisel. You go back to work. The wet season changes the rhythm of the days. In the dry season, the days are organized around the heat. Early start, midday rest in the worst of the afternoon heat. Resumed work in the cooling late afternoon. In the wet season, the days are organized around the rain. Light rain can be worked through, as you are working through it now, but the heavy afternoon rains that the monsoon produces are a different thing. When the afternoon storms come, and they come almost every day at this season, building in the southwest and arriving as walls of water that reduce visibility to 10 meters and make working in exposed positions dangerous, the site goes undercover. The undercover work is interior finishing, the work that needs to be done inside the galleries and corridors and chambers anyway, continued during the rain hours rather than the dry hours. You have spent the wet season's first 3 weeks in a pattern, morning work on exterior elements like this approach terrace, afternoon work on interior finishing in whichever gallery section your assignment takes you to. It is more productive than the dry season in one sense. The cooler air means you can work longer without the heat fatigue that hits the site in the dry season's peak months. Your water consumption is lower, your afternoon stamina is better. But the scaffolding is wetter and requires more frequent inspection. And the stone is different. You have adjusted your chisel approach for the moisture content, working with slightly more pressure and slightly less speed than in the dry season. Everything adjusts. By mid-morning, the approach terrace balustrade work on the southern side is well advanced. You have cleared the tool marks from 3 of the 4 pedestal sections and begun the levelness work on the 4th. The 4th is the most damaged of them. The initial dressing here was rough, which suggests it was done at the end of a long day by tired hands, and the tool marks are deeper than on the other 3. You work them methodically. The rain mist has lightened even further, and the western gopura behind you is now clearly visible. The great gateway with its 4 towers and its carved pediments, the entrance to the outer enclosure that every visitor to this temple will pass through. Beyond the gopura, the main causeway, and beyond it, the road to the city of Angkor. Since the wet season began, the traffic on the approach road has changed. In the dry season, the road is dust, and the workers and officials and supply carts move through the dust and raise more of it. In the wet season, the road is mud, and movement is slower and heavier. The stone causeway across the moat, by contrast, is the same in all seasons. The stone drains well and provides solid footing, regardless of the rain. This was planned. Every functional decision in this complex was planned. The moat is not decorative. It is also a drainage system, managing the water table around the temple foundations. The orientation, west-facing, which is unusual for a Hindu temple, and is associated in Khmer cosmology with death and the setting sun, was chosen deliberately, and the western approach was designed to be the primary processional entry because the afternoon light on the western face is the most dramatic, and the causeway in that light makes the approach feel significant in the way the architects intended. You know some of this because you have worked here for 11 years, and the knowledge accumulates whether you seek it or not. The building teaches you about itself through proximity. You were not a man who thought about cosmology when you arrived here at 17 years old with your father's chisel set and a letter from the district official confirming your Rajakarya assignment. You thought about stone, how it behaved, how it responded to tools, how to judge its quality before you cut it. The cosmology was somewhere above you, handled by people above you. Now you are 28. You still think about stone first. But the cosmology has entered you through the work, the way the stone dust enters you, not through any deliberate intake, but through simple, sustained presence. You have spent 11 years inside this design. It is in your body the way the chisel technique is in your hands. By early afternoon, the balustrade pedestal work is complete. You check each of the 4 sections with the straight edge, and each of them is within tolerance. You collect your tools. This is, you realize, the last exterior finishing assignment on the western approach terrace. Not the last work on the site. There is work here that will continue for years, but the western approach terrace, specifically, the forecourt of the building, the first stone the visitors' feet touch when they leave the causeway, is done. Finished. You walk the length of the approach terrace, from the outer edge to the inner face nearest the western gopura of the outer enclosure. 150 meters of stone. You finished some of it today. You have worked on some part of this terrace over 11 years. There is no section of it where your hands have not been present in some form at some point. You stand at the inner end and look back along its length. The causeway, in the afternoon light filtered through the rain mist, is a long gray line extending to the western horizon. The serpent balustrades line it on both sides, stone figures that are neither fully animal nor fully divine, rising at regular intervals as they have since the early years of construction, wearing the weather of each passing season. The building is beginning to acquire its permanent appearance. Not the sharp, precise look of new stone. That phase is passing for the sections finished earliest. What comes after the new stone phase is the appearance that will last, when the surface has been through enough wet seasons to begin the slow integration with the landscape around it. The moss will come in time. The trees will come in time. But that is not time you have any relationship with. You look at the building and you see what you have seen every day for 11 years, stone and work and the next task. The afternoon storm arrives with a suddenness that the morning's light rain gave no indication of. One moment the light is the diffuse gray of the overcast, and the next the sky to the southwest has darkened to the particular blue-black of a heavy monsoon cloud, and the wind picks up from nothing to significant in the time it takes you to turn around. You secure your tool roll under your arm and move toward the nearest shelter, a recessed alcove in the outer enclosure wall where you can stand out of the direct rain. You reach it as the first heavy drops arrive. The rain here is different from the morning's mist. This is the monsoon in its full expression, rain that falls in curtains, rain that makes the moat surface white with impact, rain that fills the drainage channels at the base of the approach terrace and runs in sheets across the stone surface you finished 2 hours ago. The stone drains well. The drainage channels were cut into the terrace edge for exactly this purpose, and they work as designed, and the surface of the terrace runs clean rather than pooling. You stand in the alcove and watch the rain on the stone you prepared. In 11 years, you have been in this rain many times. You have stood in alcoves and under temporary roofing and in the shelter of half-finished gallery walls and watched the monsoon run across the site, and each time the pattern of the rain on the stone in front of you has depended on what the stone was at that moment. Rough, finished, newly placed, or already beginning to weather. This stone is finished. The rain runs across it cleanly. Around you, other workers have sheltered in the alcove. A group of transport men, 3 or 4 from the interior finishing crew, a young apprentice mason who cannot be more than 15, and who is shivering slightly from the contrast between the hot morning and the cold rain. You look at the apprentice and recognize something in the posture, the combination of exhaustion and alert attention that characterizes someone in the first year or 2 of this kind of work, when everything is still slightly overwhelming and the body has not yet learned to conserve itself across a full day. You remember that posture. You wore it once. In a year or 2, it will change for him the way it changed for you, not all at once, but gradually, the body finding its economy, the attention narrowing to the work itself rather than the overwhelming scale of everything surrounding it. You do not say this to him. You simply stand in the alcove together, watching the rain on the stone. The rain continues for 40 minutes and then begins to ease, the monsoon storm moving northeast across the plain, the tail of it lighter and lighter until it is the same fine mist that the morning began with, and then less than that, and then the clouds are moving, and the late afternoon sun finds a gap and falls across the western approach terrace in a slanted golden light that makes the wet stone surface glow. You step out of the alcove. The sight resumes around you. Workers emerging from shelter, the sound of tools starting up again, the overseers calling the remaining work hours. You walk toward the causeway. This is an ordinary end to an ordinary day. The bell will sound in an hour. You will cross the causeway and eat your evening meal and sleep on your mat and wake when the bell sounds tomorrow and come back and do it again. This is your life. Not a complaint, not a description of constraint, just the shape of the days, the tool roll over your shoulder, the stone under your hands, The accumulated knowledge of 11 years of work in this specific place, on this specific building. You reach the main causeway and begin to cross. The moat water below you is dark from the rain. The surface is still disturbed, small circles from the last drops spreading and overlapping. The patterns complex and then slowly simplifying as the drops stop and the water settles. You walk slowly. There is no reason to rush this crossing. At the midpoint of the causeway, you stop. You turn and look back at the building. The 5 towers of the central sanctuary catch the last of the gap light in the clouds. The stones suddenly warm in that light, the golden orange of the Phnom Kulen sandstone at its most vivid. The towers are wet from the rain, and the light catches the wet surface, and the whole western face of the complex is lit for a few minutes, with a quality of light that you have never seen before in 11 years of this crossing. You stand and watch it. This is not a habit. You have never done this before, stopped at the midpoint of the causeway to look back. But something about today, the terrace work completed, the approach finished, the rain and the sun and this light has made you stop. The building looks back at you. Not with awareness. Stone has no awareness. But the building has a presence in this light that is not simply mass and height. The form is completed enough now, close enough to what it will be in its finished state, that looking at it produces something in you that you do not have a word for. The closest word is recognition. You recognize this. You made part of it. The light lasts for perhaps 3 minutes. Then the clouds close and the terrace goes back to gray and the building returns to its ordinary self, massive, present, indifferent, exactly what it is. You turn and finish crossing the causeway. On the far side, where the road to the workers' camp begins, you pause. Your hand goes to the tool roll at your shoulder, the familiar weight of it, the shape of the 7 chisels and 2 mallets and the measuring cord and the straight edge in their cloth roll, the way the weight distributes itself as it always has across your shoulder and arm. 11 years of this weight. You carry it toward camp. The road is muddy from the afternoon rain. Your feet make prints in the mud that fill slowly with water and disappear. Other workers are ahead of you and behind you on the road, the end-of-day movement of the workforce heading toward camp. The sound of the site fades behind you as you walk, the tools quieting one by one, the transport work halted, the scaffolding settling into silence as the last workers come down. The building does not quiet. It is already quiet. It has always been quiet. The noise around it has been the noise of its making, and the making is coming to completion. And when the making is done, the noise will stop, and the building will simply be what it is, which is what it has always been underneath the noise. You reach the camp. The cook fires are lit, and the smell of rice and fish and the wet season herbs that the cooks use when they can get them comes across the camp in the evening air. You set down your tool roll. You sit outside your sleeping area on the wet earth and do not eat yet and do not move yet. Your hands lie open on your knees. You look at them. They are the hands of a man who has worked stone for 11 years. The skin is thickened at the palm and at the base of the fingers where the mallet handle presses. There are small scars, a dozen or more, accumulated over the years, each one from a moment where a chisel skipped or a stone edge caught you, or a tool slipped in cold morning hands. These hands have prepared surfaces that the sculptors found gods inside. These hands have corrected levels that the king walks on. These hands have seated a crown stone at nearly 60 meters in the rain. None of this is recorded anywhere. No palm leaf document, no stone inscription, no overseer's tally stick that carries the names of the work done, only the count of the days. But the work is in the building, and the building is going to stand. Not forever. Nothing is forever, not even stone. The roots will come, and the trees, and the slow, patient work of the jungle that is always at the edges of the cleared land, waiting. Eventually the jungle will come back, as it came before, and the stone will be in the jungle, and the jungle will be in the stone, and the two will become one thing in a time so distant that the word distant fails completely. But before that, for a long time before that, the building will stand. And somewhere in it, in the level surface of the threshold stones of the inner sanctuary, in the tight joint of the corbelled vault closure above the inner corridor, in the flat panels of the third gallery where the sculptors found the armies of Kurukshetra, somewhere in all of that stone, these hands will be present. Not named, not marked, but present. The cook fires pop, and the smell of the evening meal becomes more specific. You pick up your tool roll and check your chisels. All 7 of them are sound. The day is over. You eat your evening rice, sitting outside your sleeping area in the cooling air, the tool roll beside you, the sounds of the camp settling into its night rhythm, quieter voices, the fire sounds, the distant calling of the night birds in the trees beyond the outer wall. You do not think about tomorrow's assignment. Tomorrow will tell you what tomorrow holds. You finish eating. You set down the bowl. You look up at the sky above the camp, the clouds from the afternoon storm still moving northeast, and between them, in the gaps, the beginning of the night sky. Not the full dark sky yet, the light is still fading, but the first stars appearing in the gaps between the clouds, bright and clear after the rain-washed air. The building is somewhere behind you in the dark. You do not need to turn around to know it is there. The stone holds. The day ends. The rain has stopped. The air is cool and clean after the storm, and somewhere in the camp a man is humming something low and rhythmic, one of the work songs from the eastern provinces that you only half know, and the sound moves through the evening air toward you and then moves on. Your eyes are heavy. The work was good today. The stone will be there in the morning. Everything you built today will be there in the morning. You do not need to check. You know. The tool roll is beside you. The chisels are sound. The building is complete enough that you can feel it behind you in the dark. Its mass, its presence, its weight of stone and work and accumulated days. It is enough. More than enough. Your eyes close. The cool air moves. The fire burns low. The stars appear in the gaps between the clouds, one by one, The way the figures appeared in the stone panels under the sculptor's hands, slowly at first, and then with increasing clarity, until they are simply there, fully present, as though they were always there and only needed the right conditions to become visible. The night settles. The building stands. You sleep. If you found something in this story worth holding on to, if the quiet of these nights has become part of your rest, a like, a subscribe, or a share is how this channel stays alive. It takes 1 second. It means everything. This has been Quiet History at Bedtime. Sleep well.